The news arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by officials wearing suits that looked too expensive for the dirt roads of the farming district. Day one was in his field, hands deep in the soil, when he saw the black vehicle approaching. He knew what it meant. Everyone knew. The lottery had been running for 3 weeks since the aliens made their demand. Earth would fight for its freedom, or surrender without resistance. Those were the only choices the Galactic Concordance offered. Day one wiped his hands on his pants and walked toward his small house. His sister Hannah was already outside, her face pale as fresh snow. The officials stood beside her, their expressions carefully neutral. One of them held a tablet displaying her identification photo. Hannah Kim has been selected as Earth's champion in the Trial of Judgment, the woman said. Her voice carried no emotion, as if she announced lottery results every day. Perhaps she did. She has 48 hours to prepare. The trial will take place on Neutral Ground Station 7. Day one looked at his sister. Hannah was 26 years old, brilliant with plants, terrible at sports, and had never thrown a punch in her entire life. She studied soil composition and crop genetics. She grew flowers that could survive in contaminated earth. She was not a fighter. There's been a mistake, Day one said quietly. There are no mistakes, the official replied. The selection was random and fair. Every human between ages 18 and 60 was included. I'll take her place. The officials exchanged glances. The woman consulted her tablet. Day one Kim, age 32. Former military service, Special Operations Division. Honorable discharge 7 years ago. She looked up at him. The Concordance allows substitution by immediate family members. Do you formally volunteer? Yes, Hannah grabbed his arm. You can't. You promised you'd never go back to that life. You promised. Day one had made that promise the day he came home from his last mission. He had seen too much death, caused too much of it himself. He bought this small farm in the countryside, specifically to escape violence. He grew vegetables and raised chickens. He helped his neighbors repair their fences. He lived quietly, and that quietness had healed something broken inside him. But he had also promised their parents, before they died, that he would protect his little sister. Some promises were more important than others. I'm going, he said simply. The officials processed the paperwork immediately. They seemed almost relieved. At least Earth would send someone with combat training, even if everyone knew it wouldn't matter. The aliens were too advanced, too powerful, too far beyond human capabilities. This trial was just a formality before annexation. The Voltar Empire had discovered Earth 3 years ago. They were one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, ruling over 47 different worlds. Their technology was like magic compared to human science. Their soldiers were faster, stronger, and equipped with weapons that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level. When the Voltar announced they would claim Earth as a tributary world, the Galactic Concordance intervened. The Concordance was an ancient organization that maintained peace among the stars. They had one sacred rule. Disputes between civilizations must be settled through trial by combat, not war. Single champions would fight. The winner's civilization would gain what they sought. It was supposed to prevent genocide. Instead, it just made conquest more efficient. Day one had 48 hours to prepare for a fight. He couldn't win against an opponent he had never met. The government flew him to a military base where specialists briefed him on what little they knew about the Voltar. The aliens were humanoid but taller, with 4 arms instead of 2 and skin that shifted colors based on emotion. They were incredibly strong and could see in spectrums humans couldn't perceive. His opponent would be Prince Calver, the heir to the Voltar throne. He was 24 years old and had never lost a trial combat. He had fought 12 times, representing his people in various disputes, and 12 times he had killed his opponents. He was considered a prodigy, a master of multiple fighting styles, and absolutely ruthless. "You understand this is essentially suicide," the general told Day One during the final briefing. The older man looked tired, defeated. "We're sending you because we have to send someone. But nobody expects you to win." "I understand," Day One replied. "Then why are you doing this?" Day One thought about Hana standing in that arena, terrified and alone, facing a creature bred for violence. He thought about his parents and the promises he made. He thought about all the people on Earth who would watch this trial, hoping desperately for a miracle they wouldn't receive. "Because someone has to," he finally said. They gave him the best equipment Earth could provide. A combat suit made of advanced polymers that could absorb some energy weapons fire. A rifle that fired electromagnetically accelerated projectiles. A knife forged from carbon nanotubes. Compared to Veltar technology, it was primitive. But it was what they had. The night before departure, Hana visited him in his quarters. She brought him tea and sat beside him in silence for a long time. "You don't have to die for me," she whispered eventually. "I'm not planning to die," Day One said, though they both knew it was likely. "I'm planning to fight." "There's a difference. What if you can't win?" "Then I'll make sure he remembers to fight." Day One took his sister's hand. "Listen to me. Whatever happens in that arena, I need you to promise me something. Keep growing your flowers. Keep making things live instead of die. The world needs more people like you." Hana was crying now, tears running down her face. "The world needs people like you too." Day One smiled sadly. "The world needs people who know when to fight and when to walk away. I'm still figuring out which one I am." The transport ship arrived at dawn. It was a Concordance vessel, neutral territory, crewed by a species that looked like walking crystals. They treated Day One with polite indifference, showing him to a small cabin where he would spend the 3-day journey to Neutral Ground Station 7. As Earth grew smaller in the viewport, Day One wondered if he would ever see it again. He wondered if Hana would tend his farm while he was gone, or if there would be no point because Earth would belong to someone else. He wondered what his parents would think of his choice. Then he stopped wondering and started preparing. He had 3 days to get his mind ready for what came next. 3 days to remember all the training he'd tried so hard to forget. 3 days to become a soldier again, one last time. The arena was waiting. So was Prince Calver. And somewhere in the balance hung the fate of 8 billion human souls who had never asked to be part of this galactic game. Day One checked his weapons and began his exercises. If this was going to be humanity's stand, he would make it count. Neutral Ground Station 7 floated in the space between galaxies, a massive structure built by the Concordance thousands of years ago. It existed for one purpose: to host trials that would prevent wars. Day One arrived to find the station already filled with spectators from across the known universe. The arena itself was enormous, nearly 2 kilometers across, with terrain that shifted and changed to test different combat skills. There were sections of desert, forest, ruins of ancient buildings, and open plains. Surrounding the arena were viewing platforms that rose in massive tiers, filled with beings from species Day One had never imagined existed. Some looked almost human. Others were pure energy contained in crystalline shells. Some floated without bodies at all, just consciousness in glowing spheres. Thousands of different civilizations, all gathered to watch 2 individuals fight for the fate of worlds. Day One was led to a preparation chamber beneath the arena. Human diplomats were waiting there, along with Concordance officials who would oversee the trial. They explained the rules in a language that was automatically translated into his mind by a neural device they'd implanted. The rules were simple and brutal. Fight until one champion yields or dies. No outside interference. No time limits. Victory goes to whoever survives. The Veltar delegation has requested a pre-combat ceremony, one of the Concordance officials informed him. She was tall and blue, with too many eyes. Prince Calver wishes to address the assembly before the trial begins. This is traditional for his people. Fine, Day One said. He was checking his weapons, making sure everything functioned correctly. The rifle had a full charge. The knife was sharp. The armor sealed properly around his body. You should know, the official continued, that this fight is being broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Trillions of beings will watch. For many of them, this will be their first encounter with humanity. Day One nodded but didn't respond. He knew what that meant. Humanity's introduction to the galaxy would be their champion dying in an arena. That was the message the universe would receive. Humans were weak, primitive, unworthy of independence. The signal came. It was time. Day One walked through the tunnel that led to the arena floor. The sound hit him first. A roar from countless alien throats and voice organs and communication methods he couldn't begin to understand. The crowd wasn't cheering for him. They were anticipating a spectacle. He stepped into the light and saw the arena properly for the first time. The ground was currently configured as rocky terrain, uneven and treacherous. Perfect for someone with 4 arms and superior balance. Already the trial was designed against him. On the opposite side of the arena, Prince Calver made his entrance. The Veltar prince was nearly 8 feet tall, his 4 arms moving with fluid grace. His skin was a deep purple that shimmered with gold highlights, and he wore armor that seemed to be made of living metal, flowing and shifting across his body. Energy weapons were integrated directly into his forearms, glowing with restrained power. He was beautiful in the way apex predators are beautiful, perfect, efficient, deadly. The crowd's roar intensified as Calver raised all 4 arms in greeting. He basked in the attention, turning slowly so every section of the audience could see him. Then he moved to the center of the arena where a platform rose from the ground. For the pre-combat ceremony, Day One walked to meet him, his boots crunching on the rocky surface. Up close, the prince was even more impressive. His eyes were golden and multifaceted, taking in everything simultaneously. When he looked at Day One, there was no respect in that gaze, only casual dismissal. People of the Concordance, Calver began, his voice amplified across the entire station. He spoke in a common galactic language, and Day One's implant translated it instantly. We gathered today to witness justice. The Veltar Empire has claimed the world called Earth as our rightful territory. The primitive beings who inhabit it have challenged this claim, as is their right under Concordance law. The prince gestured toward Day One with one of his lower arms, the movement somehow conveying contempt. This human stands as their champion. I respect his bravery, though it is the bravery of ignorance. His species has only just discovered faster than light travel. They war among themselves over resources their own planet provides in abundance. They poison their own water and air. They are children playing with tools they don't understand. Some sections of the crowd made sounds that might have been agreement. Others remained silent. Day One stood still, his expression unchanged. Let the prince talk. Words wouldn't determine the outcome of this fight. The Veltar Empire has guided 47 worlds toward enlightenment, Calver continued. We have ended conflicts that raged for millennia. We have brought peace through strength, prosperity through order. It is our burden and our honor to extend this gift to younger species who cannot yet govern themselves. The prince turned to face Day One directly now. All 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous superiority. You are brave. Human, but bravery without wisdom is merely foolishness. Your species lacks the evolution necessary for true autonomy. You cannot defend yourselves against the dangers that exist in this galaxy. You barely understand the forces that govern reality itself. Submit now, and I will ensure your people are treated with the mercy they deserve as our subjects. Bow, and I will make your death quick and painless. Your sacrifice will save your people from a harder lesson." The arena fell silent, waiting for Day One's response. Day One looked at the prince for a long moment. He thought about all the things he could say. He could speak about human resilience, about Earth's history of overcoming impossible odds, about the value of freedom over security. He could deliver an inspiring speech that would echo across the galaxy. Instead, he simply nodded once and dropped into a fighting stance. The crowd erupted in noise again. Some amused, some surprised, some disappointed there wouldn't be more ceremony. The Concordance official signaled the beginning of the trial. Prince Calver's expression hardened. His skin shifted from purple to deep red, the color of anger in Voltar biology. "So be it, human. I offered you dignity. Now you will have only pain." The prince attacked with blinding speed, all four arms moving in coordinated patterns that would have been impossible for any two-armed being to execute. Energy blasts erupted from his forearm weapons, forcing Day One to dive behind a boulder. The battle had begun, and it was immediately clear that every advantage belonged to the alien prince. He was faster, stronger, better armed, and fought with the confidence of someone who'd never known defeat. But Day One had something the prince didn't expect: experience fighting enemies who were better than him in every measurable way. In his military service, he'd learned that superior firepower didn't always win. Sometimes, the winner was whoever could adapt fastest, whoever could turn disadvantages into unexpected opportunities. Day One rolled from cover and fired 3 precise shots. Not at the prince, but at the rocky ground beneath his feet. The electromagnetically accelerated rounds shattered the stone, sending shrapnel flying and forcing Calver to shield his eyes. In that brief moment of distraction, Day One sprinted to new cover, changing positions before the prince could lock onto his location. The pattern established itself quickly. Calver had superior firepower and expected to win through overwhelming force. Day One had mobility and tactics, using the terrain and his smaller size to avoid direct confrontation. Hours passed. The fight raged across the entire arena as the terrain shifted and changed beneath them. They fought in the ruins, where Day One used tight corridors to negate the prince's reach advantage. They fought in the forest section, where Day One's training in guerrilla warfare let him strike from unexpected angles. The prince landed hits. Day One's armor cracked and burned in places. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and his left shoulder screamed with pain from a glancing energy blast. But Day One landed hits too. The prince's beautiful armor showed scorch marks. One of his lower arms hung at an odd angle, possibly fractured from a fall. Golden blood stained his skin where Day One's knife had found a gap in his protection. The crowd had gone from amused to fascinated to genuinely shocked. This wasn't supposed to be a real fight. The human was supposed to die quickly. Instead, he endured. He adapted. He survived. And Prince Calver, for the first time in his privileged life, began to understand what it meant to face an opponent who refused to accept defeat. Dawn arrived on the artificial world of the arena. Simulated sunlight breaking across the eastern horizon as the station systems cycled through their program day. Day One and Prince Calver had been fighting for 16 hours straight. Both warriors were exhausted. Day One's armor was cracked in a dozen places, barely holding together. His rifle had run out of charge 3 hours ago, discarded in the desert section of the arena. Blood and sweat mixed on his face, and every breath sent sharp pains through his ribs. At least 2 were broken, maybe more, but the prince looked worse. His beautiful armor was scorched and dented. 2 of his 4 arms hung useless at his sides, injured beyond use in this fight. His golden blood painted streaks across his purple skin, and his multifaceted eyes had lost their earlier shine of confidence. They faced each other in the ruins section, both breathing hard, both knowing the fight couldn't continue much longer. Someone would collapse soon. Someone would make a final mistake. Day one moved first, a desperate lunge that was half attack and half stumble. His legs were barely responding anymore, exhaustion making every movement feel like walking through deep water. But the prince was slower too, his reaction time degraded by fatigue and injury. Kelver tried to dodge, but his damaged legs betrayed him. He slipped on loose rubble, one knee buckling. His remaining functional arm came up to fire his integrated weapon. But Day One was already inside his guard. Too close for energy weapons to track. The human's knife found its target, slicing through a gap in the prince's armor and cutting the power conduit to his forearm weapon. Sparks erupted, and the prince cried out in pain and frustration. Day One kicked hard, sweeping the prince's legs completely out from under him. Kelver crashed to the ground on his back, and before he could recover, Day One was on top of him, knife pressed against the vulnerable spot where the prince's throat met his chest. The arena fell silent. Even the ambient sound of the station's systems seemed to fade away. Day One had won. The rules were clear. He could end this now, drive the knife home, and secure Earth's freedom. The prince was helpless beneath him, unable to defend himself, unable to escape. All it would take was one thrust. One moment of violence and it would all be over. The crowd waited. Billions of beings across the galaxy watched, expecting the final blow. Day One looked down at Prince Kelver. The young royal's eyes were wide with the first real fear he'd probably ever experienced. His skin had shifted to a pale blue color, what Day One's briefing had identified as the Voltar expression of terror. He was 24 years old. Arrogant and cruel, yes, but also just a young man who'd been raised to believe in his own superiority. A product of his culture and his upbringing, not fundamentally evil, just blind to anything outside his own experience. Killing him would be easy. Day One had killed before. He knew how to shut off the part of his mind that felt empathy, how to make the necessary choice and live with it afterward. But he also remembered why he'd stopped being a soldier. He remembered the faces of people he'd killed, even the ones who deserved it, even the ones who would have killed him if given the chance. He remembered how each death had taken something from him, piece by piece, until he barely recognized himself. Anymore, he'd left that life behind to grow vegetables and raise chickens because he'd decided there had to be a better way to solve problems than endless violence. Day One pulled the knife back slightly, moving it away from the kill zone, but keeping it close enough to threaten. "I didn't come here to kill you," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I came here so my sister wouldn't have to die. Yield, and we can both go home." The silence in the arena deepened. This was unprecedented. Champions didn't offer mercy. Trials ended with death or surrender, not negotiation. Prince Kelver stared up at him, and a dozen emotions flickered across his face in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that might have been hope. For a moment, Day One thought the prince might actually accept, might actually acknowledge that he'd lost and that life was worth more than pride. Then Kelver's expression changed. The hope vanished, replaced by cold fury. His skin shifted from pale blue to deep crimson, the color of rage so intense it bordered on hatred. "You think this is mercy?" The prince hissed, his voice like acid. "You think offering me life makes you noble? You think you've won anything here?" Day One said nothing, watching the prince carefully. Something was wrong. This felt like more than just wounded pride. "You are a fool," Kelver continued, his voice growing stronger despite his injuries. "You had one chance to prove humanity deserves respect, one opportunity to show strength, and instead you prove you deserve subjugation. You prove you are weak. Mercy is not a virtue, human. It is a failing. It is what prey offers to predators in the desperate hope they won't be devoured. The prince's good arm moved slowly, carefully, reaching toward a device built into his armor. Day One saw the movement but didn't stop it. What could a defeated warrior do at this point? My people will never accept defeat from a species so weak they cannot even finish what they start, Calver said, his fingers touching a control panel on his chest plate. You had your victory in hand and threw it away. You showed me mercy I never asked for, mercy I don't want. Mercy that proves everything I said about your primitive species was correct. The device activated with a pulse of energy that swept across the arena. Concordance officials immediately began consulting their systems, alarm spreading through their ranks. What have you done? Day One demanded, the knife pressing back against the prince's throat. Calver smiled, showing teeth stained with his own golden blood. I have invoked Protocol 77 of the Trial Accords. The secondary challenge. When a victor shows weakness by offering unnecessary mercy, the defeated party may escalate the trial to remove the option of surrender. Horror spread through the human delegation. One of the diplomats was shouting something Day One couldn't quite hear over the sudden roar of the crowd. The concordance official who had briefed Day One earlier appeared on a holographic display above the arena, her many eyes blinking in distress. The secondary challenge has been legally invoked, she announced, her voice carrying across the station. The trial will continue under modified rules. Both champions must fight until one is dead. Surrender is no longer permitted. Mercy is no longer possible. This is the law. Day One stared down at the prince in disbelief. You would rather die than accept life from a human? I would rather die than live knowing I yielded to a species that should be kneeling to mine, Calver replied. But I won't die, human. You made a fatal error. You showed me your weakness. You proved you don't have the will to do what's necessary. And now that mercy you valued so highly is forbidden, you'll have to kill me, and I don't think you can. The prince's working arm lashed out, faster than Day One expected from someone so injured. He caught Day One's wrist, forcing the knife away, and rolled despite his damaged body. They separated, both climbing painfully to their feet. Around them, the arena terrain began to shift again, responding to the new trial parameters. The ruins crumbled and reformed into an open coliseum, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Just two fighters and the space between them. Day One looked at his opponent and felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, disappointment. He had offered a way out, a path where both of them could survive, where no one else had to die. And the prince had thrown it back in his face, choosing death and violence over the simple admission that he'd lost. This was what he'd been trying to escape. This endless cycle of violence, where pride mattered more than life, where showing mercy was seen as weakness instead of strength. The crowd was screaming now, energized by this unexpected turn. They would get their death match after all. They would witness the barbarity they'd come to see. Day One picked up his knife from where it had fallen and faced the prince. His expression hadn't changed, but something inside him felt very tired. If this was what the galaxy wanted, if this was what civilization looked like among the stars, then maybe humanity was better off standing apart from it. The second phase of combat began with renewed ferocity. Prince Calver fought like a creature possessed, no longer the confident warrior who had entered the arena hours ago. Now he was desperate, fueled by humiliation and the terrible understanding that he had been beaten by someone he considered inferior. Two of his arms were useless, but the prince had trained his entire life for combat. He adapted quickly, using his remaining functional limbs with devastating efficiency. Energy blasts carved through the air where Day One had stood moments before. The prince's movements were erratic, unpredictable, driven by emotion rather than technique. This made him more dangerous. Day one countered each attack with the same methodical approach that had kept him alive this long. Block, evade, strike when openings appeared. But his body was failing. Exhaustion had moved beyond pain into a numb kind of acceptance. His muscles screamed with every movement. His vision blurred from the blood still trickling from the cut above his eye. He could kill the prince. Even now, even this tired, he had the skill and opportunity. Calvarez's injuries had slowed him down too much. Day one could see at least 3 paths to a lethal strike, 3 sequences of moves that would end this. But every time he moved to execute one of those sequences, he hesitated. Some part of him refused to commit to the kill. This hesitation kept the fight going longer than it should have. The prince noticed it, and his attacks became more aggressive, sensing that his opponent's resolve was weakening. "You cannot do it," Calver taunted between strikes, his voice ragged but triumphant. "You are too weak, too soft. This is why your species needs guidance. You lack the strength to make hard choices." Day one didn't respond. He was thinking about his sister Hannah, remembering her words before he left Earth. "Don't lose yourself in there, brother. Whatever happens, come back as you. Come back as you. Not come back victorious. Not come back having saved Earth. Come back as yourself, as the person she knew, as the man who had chosen peace over violence." But how could he do that? How could he preserve who he was while doing what needed to be done? The fight continued, grinding and brutal. They moved across the Colosseum floor, leaving trails of blood behind them. The crowd watched in fascinated silence now, the initial excitement fading into something more somber. Even beings who had never seen humans before could recognize what they were witnessing. Someone being forced to break themselves to survive. Day one deflected another energy blast and countered with a strike that opened a new wound on the prince's side. Calver staggered but kept fighting, kept pushing, kept forcing Day one toward the moment when he would have to make the final choice. Kill or be killed. That was what it came down to. The prince had made sure there were no other options. Day one thought about all the people he'd killed during his military service. Enemy combatants mostly, but also people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. People he'd killed because mission parameters demanded it, because orders required it, because in the chaos of combat, there wasn't time to sort out who deserved to die and who didn't. He remembered their faces. Every single one. They haunted his dreams even now, years after he'd put down his weapons. That was the price of violence, even necessary violence. It took pieces of your soul and didn't give them back. After he left the military, Day one had sworn to himself that he would never kill again unless there was absolutely no other choice. Not for money, not for country, not for any cause except the direct defense of innocent life. Was this that situation? Was killing the prince truly necessary? Earth needed him to win. 8 billion people were depending on him. If he lost, humanity would become subjects of the Veltar Empire, their freedom stripped away, their future decided by others. Wasn't that worth fighting for? Wasn't that worth killing for? But another thought nagged at him. If he killed the prince here, what message would that send? Humanity's introduction to the galaxy would be violence. They would prove they could be just as brutal as any other species, just as willing to kill when pushed. Was that who humans were? Was that who he was? Day one blocked another attack and found himself thinking about his farm. The small plot of land where he grew tomatoes and peppers, where chickens wandered freely, where everything was alive and growing. He had built that place as a rejection of his past, as a statement that life mattered more than death. What good was saving Earth if he lost the values that made Earth worth saving? The realization hit him like a physical blow. He stopped moving, just for a second, and in that second, he understood what he had to do. The prince saw the opening and lunged forward, his blade aimed at Day One's heart. But Day One wasn't there anymore. He'd stepped aside, not to counterattack, but to disengage. "No," Day One said quietly. Calver spun to face him, confusion replacing bloodlust on his face. "What?" "No," Day One repeated, louder this time. "I won't do this." He reached up and removed his helmet, setting it carefully on the ground. His face was visible now, covered in blood and bruises, but his expression was calm. "Pick up your weapon," the prince demanded. "Fight!" Day One began removing his chest armor piece by piece. The crowd's murmur grew louder, thousands of beings trying to understand what they were witnessing. "What are you doing?" Calver screamed. "This is not permitted. You cannot surrender. The rules forbid it." "I'm not surrendering," Day One said. He set his chest plate down next to his helmet. Then he pulled the knife from his belt and dropped it too. "I'm making a choice." The human delegation in the stands was in chaos. Diplomats were shouting, trying to understand, trying to stop this. But Day One couldn't hear them. He was focused entirely on the prince now. "You wanted me to prove humanity's strength," Day One said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "You think strength is the willingness to kill. But you're wrong. Real strength is knowing when killing makes you weaker." He removed the last piece of his armor and stood in just his torn underlayer, completely defenseless. "I could kill you. I had dozens of chances. I still have them now. You're injured, exhausted, and I'm trained for this in ways you've never experienced. But killing you doesn't prove anything except that I can kill. And I already knew that. I've known it for years. It's haunted me for years." Prince Calver stood frozen, his weapon raised but not firing. "You think mercy is weakness," Day One continued. "You think compassion makes someone pray. But I think you're terrified. Terrified that if you acknowledge someone you consider inferior could beat you, your entire worldview collapses. Every lesson you were taught, every belief you hold, all of it falls apart." Day One turned his back on the prince and began walking toward the arena exit. "I won't kill you to satisfy your pride. I won't become a murderer just to prove I'm strong. You want Earth? You want to rule over humanity? Then do it by killing an unarmed man in front of the entire galaxy. Show everyone watching what your civilization really values. Show them what kind of superior being you really are." His footsteps echoed in the absolute silence of the arena as he walked away from the fight. The arena existed in a state of perfect silence that felt like the entire universe holding its breath. Day One walked steadily toward the exit, each step deliberate and measured. His back was exposed to Prince Calver, vulnerable to any attack, but he didn't look back. Didn't hesitate. Just walked up behind him. The prince stood motionless, his weapon raised and ready. Every fiber of his training screamed at him to fire. The human was defenseless. Victory was there for the taking. All he had to do was pull the trigger. But billions of eyes watched him now. Beings from every corner of the galaxy, all witnessing this moment. All waiting to see what he would do. In the stands, the human delegation was in complete chaos. Diplomats shouted at each other, some demanding someone stop Day One, others frozen in shock. Hannah stood at the railing, tears streaming down her face. One hand pressed to her mouth as she watched her brother walk away from the fight that would determine Earth's fate. The Concordance officials scrambled to consult their ancient laws. Nothing in the trial accords covered this situation. A champion who refused to fight, who deliberately made himself defenseless, who simply walked away. It was unprecedented in 3,000 years of trials. Day One was halfway to the exit now. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but he kept them steady. This was important. This moment mattered more than anything he'd ever done. Behind him, Prince Calvar's hand trembled. His finger hovered over the firing mechanism. One pull. That's all it would take. End the human, claim victory, restore his honor. But something held him back. Not compassion, not mercy. Something worse. Doubt. The human's words echoed in his mind. Show everyone watching what your civilization really values. Calvar had been raised to believe the Veltar were superior because they were strong. Because they could conquer. Because they ruled through force when necessary. But was shooting an unarmed opponent in the back strength? Would the galaxy see this as the action of a superior being or something else entirely? He'd spent his entire life being told that other species needed Veltar guidance because they were weak, primitive, incapable of making proper decisions. But the human had just made a decision Calvar himself couldn't make. Had chosen principle over survival in a way that the prince, for all his advanced evolution and superior culture, found incomprehensible. What did that mean? Day one reached the arena gate. The human delegation rushed toward him, and his sister broke through the line of diplomats to reach him first. She wrapped her arms around him, sobbing, and he held her gently despite his injuries. "You're insane," she whispered. "You're completely insane." "Maybe," Day One replied, "but I'm still me." Behind them, Prince Calvar slowly lowered his weapon. His hand fell to his side. The killing shot went untaken. The silence in the arena finally broke as the crowd erupted in a cacophony of sounds. Beings from 1,000 different species, all trying to process what they just witnessed. Some shouted in anger, others in awe, many simply in confusion. The Concordance officials huddled together, their urgent discussion projected across multiple holographic displays. After several minutes, the lead official stepped forward, her many eyes blinking rapidly in what might have been distress. "The trial is void," she announced, her voice amplified across the station. Prince Calvar invoked the secondary challenge after receiving mercy, which violated the spirit of honorable combat. However, Champion Day One refused to complete the trial under its modified rules. Neither party achieved victory under the established parameters. She paused, consulting with her fellow officials one more time. The matter of Earth's status will be referred to the full Galactic Concordance Council for deliberation and vote. This decision is final. The human delegation didn't know whether to celebrate or despair. They hadn't lost, but they hadn't won either. Earth's fate was still undecided. Day One didn't care about any of that right now. He was just glad to be alive, glad to be holding his sister, glad that he hadn't had to kill anyone. Prince Calvar stood alone in the center of the arena, surrounded by his own delegation who rushed to check on his injuries. But the prince wasn't looking at them. He was staring at the spot where Day One had walked away, his expression unreadable. For the first time in his 24 years of life, Prince Calvar questioned everything he'd been taught. The human should have been easy to defeat, should have been clearly inferior, should have proven that the Veltar were right to claim dominion over lesser species. Instead, the human had shown something the prince didn't have. Not superior technology or greater physical strength, but a kind of moral courage that Calvar had never encountered. The strength to walk away from a fight even when everything was at stake. The strength to choose principle over victory. Was that weakness as he'd been taught? Or was it possible that his teachers had been wrong? The broadcasts of the trial spread across the galaxy at faster than light speeds. Trillions of beings watched and discussed what they'd seen. The human who walked away, the prince who couldn't shoot him in the back. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. When the Galactic Concordance Council convened to vote on Earth's status, species after species voted in favor of human independence. Not because they feared humanity's military might or valued their technology, but because they had watched Day One in that arena and seen something rare. They'd seen a being who valued life over victory, who chose compassion over conquest, who walked away from violence when every instinct must have screamed at him to fight. We've watched thousands of trials, one council member stated during the proceedings. We've seen strength displayed in countless forms, but we've rarely seen wisdom. The human champion showed us something his species values principle enough to risk everything for it. That suggests a civilization capable of self-governance. The vote wasn't unanimous. The Veltar delegation and their allies voted against it. But the majority ruled in humanity's favor. Earth would remain independent. When news of the decision reached the station, the human delegation celebrated with exhausted relief. Day one sat quietly in a medical bay while doctors treated his injuries, Ha beside him holding his hand. "You saved the world by refusing to fight for it," she said, still struggling to understand. "How does that make sense?" "I didn't save the world," Day one replied. "I just refused to become someone I'm not." The rest sorted itself out. On his home world, Prince Calver recovered from his injuries in isolation. He'd requested no visitors, not even his own family. He spent his time reviewing footage of the trial, watching that moment when the human turned his back and walked away. He'd been given everything in life: power, privilege, victory after victory. But he'd never been given a choice like the one Day one made. He'd never had to decide between his principles and his survival. He'd never had to be brave in a way that didn't involve weapons. The prince didn't know if he could have made the same choice. That uncertainty haunted him more than the defeat itself. Slowly, privately, he began to question the assumptions he'd built his life on. About superiority and strength. About what it meant to be civilized. About the burden his people claimed to carry, and whether it was actually a burden or just an excuse. It would take time. Years maybe. But something had changed in the young prince during those minutes in the arena. Something that would shape the rest of his life. Day one returned to Earth 3 days later. The government offered him medals, honors, a position in their new diplomatic corps. He declined all of it. He just wanted to go home. His farm was exactly as he'd left it. The chickens needed feeding. The vegetables needed watering. There was work to do, the simple kind that nourished rather than destroyed. Hana stayed with him for a few weeks, helping restore the place. They worked in comfortable silence mostly, occasionally talking about small things. The weather, the crops, anything but the trial. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, she asked him the question that had been bothering her. "Do you think you made the right choice? Walking away like that?" Day one was quiet for a long moment, watching the sky turn orange and purple. "I think I made the only choice I could live with," he finally said. "Winning isn't everything if you lose yourself in the process. And wars don't end when everyone is dead. They end when someone chooses to stop fighting." He looked at his sister and smiled, tired but genuine. "I chose to stop fighting. And somehow, that was enough." News of humanity's trial spread throughout Earth. People debated what it meant, what message it sent, how they should feel about being saved by someone who refused to fight. But gradually, a consensus emerged. They'd been introduced to the galaxy not as conquerors or victims, but as themselves. Flawed, stubborn, principled in ways that sometimes seemed crazy. And the galaxy had decided that was enough. Humanity took its place among the stars, carrying with them the memory of the man who walked away from a fight and won something more important than victory. They carried the lesson that strength wasn't always measured in weapons and violence. Sometimes, the strongest thing you could do was simply refuse to become something you weren't. And in that refusal, in that simple act of walking away, Day one had shown the galaxy what humanity could be.